For everyone in the chat at the moment, feel free to let us know if you can hear us or if you're having any audio difficulties. There's should be a chat feature there available where you can add your questions and anything else. And with that, we might kick off. So you're very welcome to the debrief with myself and Derek Mooney, political commentator and former government press officer for Fianna Fáil. What we'll be covering here is a full breakdown of how the presidential race went for all three candidates, and maybe a +1 as part of that. You know, since I suppose late September, before nominations formally closed, right up until polling day. What we'll be looking at is a lot of the key trending stories that have emerged as part of that campaign. You know, how the candidates performed across local and national radio. In total, we have analysed 16,400 plus radio clips across 60 stations over that period, and it's given us, you know, a massive amount of data, you know, in order to break this race down. Just to get everyone orientated with what you're going to be looking at here, this is the Everhaze dashboard where we charted each mention for each individual candidate. The first dashboard here that you'll see, every, you know, green or red bubble is a mention. We weight it based on, you know, outlet, sentiment, the trending story in terms of positivity, negativity, and then we have a second chart here just in terms of cumulative narrative, which basically just gives an overall sense as to, you know, the balance between positive and negative sentiment. To the right, we'll play some clips as we go along over the next hour, just to give you a flavour as to what the public were saying and what stories are really resonating. And we'll also be taking a closer look at, you know, audience trends, coverage volume trends, demographics as well. As always, if there's any questions you want answered as part of the discussion, feel free to post them here and we'll dip in and try and answer them as best we can as we go along. So Derek, where is the best place to start? I suppose we're looking here at Catherine Connolly, our new Uachtaráin. So maybe we might start off with herself and her entry into the race.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very good point at which to start, and to maybe look at the candidates individually but also kind of looking at them chronologically within each candidate cohort. Just at the outset, you described me as a former government press secretary, but not nearly as exalted a person. I was a mere ministerial advisor. But where I come from this, and I've worked on a whole range of campaigns within Fianna Fáil, I've long since left Fianna Fáil. But for example, I was involved in the marriage equality campaign, and then I would have looked at messaging and research for the Shannon reform campaign. So that's why I would have a particular interest in this. And somebody who's been working in campaigns for the guts of 40 years, local, national, European. So I think and I think this as a piece of data, but as a piece of analysis, is critically important. And I think these things are for anyone who's involved in campaigns. If you're looking at polling, you're kind of measuring things that have just passed. To be able to look at this in almost real time, actually it is in real time, is an exceptional move forward. And I think this will be a very, very important campaigning tool for a lot of people, but also for media analysts and right across the board. So I'm kind of very, very happy to be part of this.
Right. Well, listen, thanks so much for that, Derek. So I suppose where we might start off is just playing a few clips just to refresh our memories as to how Catherine came into the race. The first clip I'll play here is probably one of the first mentions of Catherine and her candidacy on the 7th of July on Highland Radio.
I would vote for Catherine Connolly for president. She's educated, a great speaker, and has compassion and a deep understanding of the...
You know, so, you know, straight out of the bat, you know, the sheer, fact that there was a rumor that she might enter the race was already bringing around kind of texter positive sentiment. Then I suppose we have a second clip here from the Hard Shoulder.
So, Catherine Connolly, you mentioned, is your suspicion that she would hoover up a lot of those independent voices within the houses of the Oireachtas by way of nomination, so you might have to go down the county council route?
Yeah, well, I'm looking at that. If she was talking to independents, which I'm hearing she is, well, I'd say she's a strong figure in that.
And again, maybe just at that point, giving a signal as to what her strategy was going to be as an independent candidate, starting to approach independence. We then have this 2 days later.
Some of the names that have been thrown out there include Catherine Connolly, the independent TD, perhaps Frances Back as well, although she herself has said it's gotten...
Being in the mix. We have Tip FM then.
There.
Yeah, a few people on to us proposing the Galway TD, isn't she? Galway TD, Catherine Connolly, to be the next president for.
Well, actually, friend, no, she'd be a lady I'd give number one to.
Would you? Yeah. Yeah.
I would. I have been, and especially for her act with the mother and baby, she's done a terrific job, and so has a lot of others, don't get me wrong. But the fact of her English vocabulary, when you listen to her speak, both in the Caintas Gaeilge and English,
she's very compassionate, isn't she?
So unique, it's unreal.
Those were all points that actually repeatedly, came up just in terms of, general contributions around Catherine Connolly and her overall persona, what she was known for. One of the trends there, we have the mother and baby homes and her advocacy there, trended quite early in terms of positive sentiment. We also have then, I suppose she kind of moved into the nomination phase. You see some of this.
For Fine Gael, that's the only real candidate we have in the field that I perceive could be electable, but I think there are others to come that would jump ahead of her. I don't see Catherine Connolly, the independent candidate, that is on as electable at all.
They're the only two really announced.
Yeah. This is an intriguing point, which is and again, I think that graph you have there, which showed the early point at which Catherine Connolly came in, that's how you can not quite build up a lead, but you can build up a bank of very solid, positive content. And sentiment, I should say, probably more correctly, which is if your candidate starts out early, they're not going to get huge coverage. In terms of the volume of these, in terms of the number of these, they're not huge.
No.
But the cumulative effect, week in, week out, that you've positive comment and people welcoming your candidacy, not declaring that they're backing you. Indeed, one person there saying they're not backing you, but that this is positive, and it shows you kind of sometimes people say, well, why do these campaigns, or why do parties, or why do political have these will they, won't they? Well, this is the reason why, because that discussion of it, where it's not challenged in an election, I think during a campaign environment, the narrative changes, and we can see in any of the graphs that these change. But that pre-campaign stuff, okay, it's harder to get pushed through. People aren't as engaged, but those who are engaged pick up on it, and it goes into a bank of knowledge or a bank of information. And I think, and you see that in the cumulative graph that you have there.
And one of the things that you'd have to just be mindful of, Catherine got such a clean run from early July right up to closing nominations, really, in terms of just like positive sentiment, positive conversations around her candidacy. The run up, obviously securing Sinn Féin a vote of confidence, the Social Democrats, the Labour Party, bringing together that United Left movement, as it would become known as. All of that just gave a very, very clear run, whereby her cumulative effect was already, momentum was already there.
Absolutely. But what's intriguing about that is that if you look at the broader commentary, we're just to look in terms of some of the analysis from coming from people, including people like myself, was, Catherine, that's great, lovely person, but she's not really at the race. She's not really going to be a contender. She's really not going to be in the final 2 or final 3, but she'll probably get through to the ticket. And that seems to be the talk. That wasn't hurting her. There wasn't even a negative in that.
No.
Now, at each point, as you say, when she secured first the Social Democrats backing, then maybe a little more controversially the Labour Party backing, and there was some pushback in the government, but not to the point that it was hurting her. So when Alan Kelly or other people voiced any kind of qualms or questioned it, it wasn't actually hurting Catherine Connolly. It then kind of trundled on for a while, and then the Sinn Féin backing made all the difference. But throughout all of this, there wasn't a huge amount of negative. Although people were saying, I don't think she'll make it, that wasn't turning into negative sentiment for her. And that's, I think, an intriguing thing for people who are involved in campaigns to take away from this. Don't get het up at everything, the fact that not everyone's saying you're wonderful all the time. For as long as they're not saying you're bad, and as long as the people are saying, yes, well, fair play to you getting into the race, then that's a good place to be at that point.
For sure. And look, I think we might just take a brief look then at Heather Humphreys and her entry into the race. You know, it does contrast, you know, a little bit more, I suppose, in that. First of all, the first early mentions of Heather were early August, obviously, you know, following word that Mairead was sadly ill. She did have some more negative drag coming into the closing nominations. I think some of that was to do around the contest, you know, other parts of it obviously in terms of her record. But I might just kind of play some of the clips in relation to when you know, she first emerged as a prospective Fine Gael nominee.
Discover the Whirlpool laundry range at Power City. The Power City does up
your business profits at Weekend Market Tender.
Okay, there we go.
She did this through advertising, apparently.
Yeah.
Now, with speculation beginning to swirl that Heather Humphreys could be convinced to step into the breach. So we will talk about that again a little.
So that was the 14th of August, one of the first mentions.
Even that's not full on positive. Because again, the first thing is, which is for a long period, it appeared to be a sine qua non that was going to be Mairead McGuinness. Indeed, that was the general acceptance. And if you look at if you put this side by side with national polls, it was showing national polls were showing Mairead McGuinness a good bit ahead of other candidates, including Catherine Connolly, as we said at the time. But what you then, as soon as Mairead McGuinness came out, there was a lot of, as I said earlier, the will she, won't she? But you then had pushback from Sean Kelly. So none of this was a fait accompli. And even then, people were talking about, oh, she's a good candidate, but what about her negative? What about, and so even when she did have positives, they were not sufficiently strong to get her that bank of goodwill or a positive sentiment that had existed. But
what I found quite interesting, and this wasn't so Michael Healy-Rae came out very early doors in terms of his support, and it was like one of two occasions where that happened. This was 2 days later after Heather's name first starts emerging.
Oris, Junior Agriculture Minister Michael Healy-Rae thinks former Minister Heather Humphreys would be great for the role.
Because I believe that she's a very sound lady who performed very well in various different departments. She'd have a broad appeal in both urban and rural Ireland. And I just think she'd be a very well-placed person to represent us nationally.
An interesting, I suppose, position to take, and that would
absolutely. And you can see what Fine Gael was doing there, which was trying to put her appeal beyond Fine Gael.
Yes.
And I think you had Sean Canny. I don't think he was as vocal on radio, but I think it was Noel Grealish. So there was 3 government supporting independents who came out in very, very quick move. And there was an attempt by Fine Gael, very understandably, to build up a momentum to catch up with that thing that they didn't have earlier.
Yeah. And a week later, then we have this.
Former Minister Heather Humphreys confirmed to the Joe Finnegan show this week that she is putting her name forward in a bid to become the next President of Ireland.
So candidacy confirmed now, having some good lean of support, and then obviously a week.
Today it's expected Heather Humphreys will be confirmed as the Fine Gael candidate for the presidential election. That's after MEP and former GA President Sean Kelly reluctantly withdrew from the race for a second time.
Do you know?
But even the word reluctantly, this is kind of that there's still a little bit of a sting in the tail, but it's even on the positives. But I think again it's intriguing, which is Heather had unlike Catherine Connolly, who had a much longer lead in. Heather didn't, and therefore she was trying to build up the same bank of support and sentiment, a positive sentiment, in a much shorter space of time. So that meant it was far more intense, but that brings a risk.
Yeah, I mean, look, we will make a move on then to Jim Gavin and his entry in the race, and obviously, a lot more controversial for a whole host of reasons. What you do tend to find, and I did kind of highlight these early on, that, Jim at the time was already, I think the new rules of the GAA were being pushed through. He was already spoken about. This is kind of just one example where you can kind of see, maybe some of the mentality behind bringing him forward as a candidate.
Jim Gavin was in charge. We're under no illusion. Years and years playing under this guy. It's about doing the basics at the highest level, and that's what these rules reward, and that's what you see from the two teams who are in the All-Ireland final.
So that was the original framing, that I think, he was introduced as a candidate. And again, there was a few of these
GAA coach and pundit Jeremy Scullion remarked that the review team, headed by Jim Gavin, deserve a lot of
so he had kind of some positive mentions. I won't play them all, but
it's important to note that they were right across the country.
Yes.
I think one of the things that people were saying, oh my heavens, if Fianna Fáil is picking the coach and the manager of the Dublin team, they're not going to cause offence in Kerry or Mayo or wherever else, etc. But anyone I was talking to, particularly a couple of colleagues now in GAA, were saying, no, you don't understand that. Right across the membership, there's a huge positive, because don't underestimate the amount of work he's done on the rules. So I can see why, at a certain level, Fianna Fáil was going to say, okay, this guy has a lot of positives. People have been talking about him. Now, I know that the coverage doesn't go back that far, but even his work on what was happening in the northeast inner city or what he was involved in the Citizens' Assembly, etc. So I can see why there would be this view that, people have a positive view of him.
And that would have been July, early August. By late August, we get the first mention that he's in the mix.
The same paper leads with the growing momentum behind a Fianna Fáil nomination for former Army officer and Dublin GAA.
So like 28th, the next day, then obviously that story.
The last few days, it looks as though Jim Gavin is the one that has the backing of Micheál Martin and a party leadership that this is what he's been working on all summer, trying to get someone slightly outside of politics.
So Micheál has taken full ownership now at this stage.
And I think that's intriguing that from the moment the Gavin candidacy became public, and I think it was around a weekend where it broke into the public domain, it was very closely associated with Micheál. Because you also had Billy Kelleher's candidacy been talked about at that time, and it was definitely that the association of Jim Gavin with Micheál Martin was extremely strong, and I'm sure from Micheál Martin's point of view, that was a positive.
I think the framing then of Jim as a candidate starts to come through.
The Public Expenditure Minister is the latest cabinet minister to announce his support for former Dublin GAA manager Jim Gavin for president. Gerard Chambers says he's a person of integrity, humility and distinction with a strong record of public service.
So obviously Jack goes forward, Ódí Nahéireann, GAA manager, all of those achievements, and kind of that framing is already, very active. And I suppose a week later, then things start to get, more competitive, we'll say, with the emergence then of
6 more Fianna Fáil TDs have backed Jim Gavin to be the party's presidential candidate. It means the former Dublin football manager almost has the backing he needs to defeat Billy Kelleher. A total of 31 members of Fianna Fáil's parliamentary party have publicly backed Mr. Gavin. He needs 36.
This was an intriguing part of the dynamic. And I think the parliamentary party meeting was on a Tuesday or Wednesday to select a candidate. And you could see from late the week before, from the Wednesday or Thursday, that there was a drive within the Fianna Fáil parliamentary party to get Jim Gavin above the numbers before the weekend, so that the Sunday papers would already have said, look, this is fait accompli. He's now got declared 40-something members of the Fianna Fáil parliamentary party. And it was intriguing. I think the number stopped around 33. And it stalled at that from Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Now, there weren't an awful lot of people coming out announcing publicly for Billy Kelleher. So you had this story coming out, well, Billy Kelleher will probably get about 14 and Jim will take the rest. And when, during that week, it became clear that the numbers were not that favourable to Jim Gavin and that he was always going to win the nomination, I think that's the point things started going a bit wrong. Because what should have been a highly choreographed, coordinated, straightforward campaign were all in behind Jim. Again, going back a look at the Heather Humphreys, where there was an attempt to build a huge amount of momentum, a huge amount of sentiment in a short space of time to catch up. And by the Tuesday, Wednesday, and then by the time the vote came out that Billy Kelleher had 29 votes, not 14. I think you see. I think you can even see it on the graph itself. The negatives really start kicking in.
Yeah, for sure. And look, this is obviously, I believe,
time. Jim Gavin on the Fianna Fáil ticket for the Áras. We get party reaction after today's vote.
And then to one.
So that's the 9th of September, formally in the race, and discussion.
That's it. Like 40% of the party did not vote for Jim Gavin, who is now the party's nominee for the presidential election. So really it was quite a substantial vote for Billy Kelleher. And I know Jim Gavin won out, but really the focus at the moment is the support that Billy Kelleher was able to receive. That
it was that bruising.
It is, and because it had been framed that Jim Gavin was Micheál Martin's candidate, was his preferred choice, and the parliamentary party were now not quite defined. There was a democratic choice; they're perfectly entitled to do what they wanted to do, but that was now been framed. So now this was negative for Micheál Martin, and it was negative for Jim Gavin. And suddenly, a negative for Jim Gavin was a negative for Micheál Martin. That becomes, and we can go through this later. It's almost impossible to unhook those two things for the following 10 days or 2 weeks.
And look, I suppose while we're on, Jim Gavin now, we might as well just kind of stick with that theme. And now
it's only a short space.
Maybe start looking at. I have highlights. Unfortunately, not too many. We'll go into the controversies.
No. It's difficult to listen to.
It is for sure. So look, I suppose you start to see, and I mean, one of the things across all candidates you see is that once nominations close and the race starts, it is like a bang of a bus, in terms of like negative stories, sentiment. I mean, the race really heats up. I would say for a first-time politician going into that bear pit, first of all, has got to be just personally quite daunting, and the first kind of story that really emerges is the social media,
the fake news. They're very malicious.
Yes, for sure.
It's been a fascinating weekend in the race for the Áras, Ciara, with Catherine Connolly receiving the endorsement of Sinn Féin. Jim Gavin has been writing to social media companies about social media posts, derogatory ones that have appeared online. And of course, you've two candidates still trying to get onto the ballot paper. We'll have the late.
And that was the framing straight out of the traps. Even Morning Ireland then.
I'm going to fight back against malicious smears. That's the headline on the front of the Irish Independent. It's a quote from Fianna Fáil presidential candidate Jim Gavin, who's reported to be deeply hurt and distressed by untrue posts about his private life.
So I mean, that story was like the first week of Gavin's candidacy. That very much kind of framed.
It does. Now, one thing to imagine, we saw it in and again, you need to have a longer memory, like me, but around too long, which is from the McAleese campaign. When negative stories come out, most of them actually backfire. So therefore, if I'm trying to smear you, it tends to backfire on it doesn't hurt you as hard. And I think from Jim Gavin's point of view, that wasn't going to be, because it was manifestly untrue, because it was clearly malicious, because it was clearly toxic, it was clearly coming from dubious sources. That was always going to backfire against. It wasn't going to hurt him. It wasn't going to. Now, it wasn't a great framing of him immediately. It was that he's now already defensive.
Well, it's about first impressions, isn't it?
It is,
and the wider electorate getting to know.
And because, and this is maybe where the misreading from Fianna Fáil was, which is, he is a very, very positive. People have a very, very positive opinion of him from his work in the GAA, but that doesn't transfer across to politics. If you want to know this, go back and you can ask Mary Davis, you can ask Joan Freeman, you can ask David Norris, people who had given huge service to the country, who had done great work. But when they got into that presidential election, it wasn't that was disregarded. It was people now saying, okay, but now you're in this political environment. What's your relevance in this environment? And I think that was a difficulty for Jim Gavin. But there's no doubt, coming out of the traps, first thing out, that you're hit with this, it was a body blow. For the campaign, but not one. But it wasn't one that should have brought it down. It wasn't one that was going to blankly down.
Again, I think this just highlights this is the cut and trust of politics. And
going back
modern
to
day politics,
absolutely modern day politics, the advent of social media, the input of social media, but also that to be able to follow this almost on a day-to-day basis and to track it on a day-to-day basis is the great skill.
Yeah, for sure.
And I'm sure, like, I've no doubt that political parties themselves are looking at things like this and the rest of it, so they can track this as it goes along. But it's important to see that and to see how much cut through is it having.
Yeah, and you know, like, I suppose we'll say a few days later, then really what, you know, I think media are trying to do is get to the heart of, like, what does Jim Gavin believe, you know?
And then Jim Gavin, the kind of great unknown, and that's actually a problem for him.
His campaign launch, I think, is underway this morning.
Yes, so we might, maybe today we'll learn a little bit more, but it's still unclear why Jim Gavin is running for president and why now.
You know, I mean, that was a fairly open question, but also an opportunity to fill that gap, right?
It's one of the most difficult questions because of the nature of the office, and because of there's something nebulous about the office of president. This is almost like the what you call that, the West Wing, the 14-word answer. Why do you want to be president of Ireland? It's a very difficult thing. When you say that, like, when you can offer a 3 or 4 paragraph answer, but that's not what you have time for. And the difficulty with Jim Gavin is I don't think anyone sat down and said, well, why do you want to be president? And it's called, oh, it's a great honor. Yeah, but why do you want to be president? And that becomes it. Now, I think Heather Humphreys kind of suffered a little bit from that. And I think Catherine Connolly was the one who probably had the clearest answer. The clearest messaging about why she wanted to be president, what she wanted to represent, what she felt her presidency would represent. And I think she had a clearer and more concise version of that. It wasn't a perfect one. But when compared to the other candidates on offer, it was clearer.
And it's like anyone going for a job, one of the first interview questions is, why do you want to work here? You know, and look, you know, like, it was kind of death by a thousand cuts in some ways, up until, you know, we had the drone incident, we had, you know, the photographs, you know.
But none of those were having negative impact on a short span.
Yes.
But the problem is when they come cumulatively on top of a lot of negatives. What you're not seeing for Jim is a huge amount of big positives.
No. And just kind of as we're going along this, I'm just kind of showing, you know, how some of these stories impacted. I mean, cumulatively, you know, looking at 120, 140 across, you know, a lot of these different mentions, they're not major, you know.
No, the drone thing,
cuts.
The train thing is a nuisance, and it's a real irritant where people working in that campaign really kicked themselves that day. But within 24 hours, you're onto something else. But it has to be positive. If it isn't, because you've now got to get rid of that small negative from yesterday, you now have to build up a positive to counterbalance that. The Fianna Fáil campaign was never able to get that little bit ahead.
No, and look, you know, we will cover the withdrawal now shortly. We might just take a quick look then at Catherine Connolly's early controversies. I mean, one of the first ones was, you know, Alan Kelly, right?
Today, the Tipperary North TD dominated the headlines after he told Tip FM last week that he wouldn't be supporting the party's candidate in the presidential election.
You know, that was obviously, you know, quite an interesting, because it was 3 times he articulated this view over the course of the campaign.
And well, Alan Kelly doesn't give up. Now, it probably has as much to do with what's happening within the Labour Party as what's happening with Catherine Connolly. But the impact was going to be on Catherine Connolly. Strange, but and while it was getting mentions and it was having a negative effect where she already was, all of us just doing a slightly denting and maybe bringing the trajectory of her upwards curve down a bit, but it was never bringing it down.
No, and I mean, like,
that's
quite obvious. You know, you can see that there was just more positive things being said about her in the campaign.
It would plateau occasionally, but it never came into a dip. And that's the map of a highly successful campaign.
For sure. And look, you know, again, the early framing of her candidacy in terms of kind of the big questions.
She has the backing of left-leaning parties and many in Labour, but not all. Former leader Alan Kelly has been critical of her. Justin McCarthy put this to Connolly.
One of the concerns he raised about you was your decision 7 years ago to give a presidential nomination to Gemma O'Doherty, who a month earlier had said that the HPV vaccine did not stand up to scrutiny. And now you told us on the Independent.
He goes on to mention kind of that trip to Syria as well. And like, you know, like, Alan Kelly was the first to plant those seeds. And again, we have
last time there was, and even if you look at Catherine Connolly and the Gemma O'Doherty,
it repeatedly then came up in the early stages. But I mean, when you're looking at the overall kind of sentiment, I know it looks kind of bad here, but realistically, it wasn't really doing much damage.
No, because they, first of all, it wasn't knocking them off their message.
Yeah.
Catherine Connolly, whether you like the answer or not, she had an answer. She wasn't deflecting, she wasn't avoiding, she was having an answer. She was answering it. And that's one way of dealing with negative comment, which is to address it. But you also have to have somebody else. She had very, very good surrogates. She had very good people out speaking on her behalf who were going with also a very positive her message, and were just banging that home constantly.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to note that in terms of the data you're tracking here, it's right across local radio.
Yeah.
And that's the thing, which is not everything you hear in the national media, national radio, is reflecting what's happening in local radio.
That's very true.
There are different stories happening at the same time.
Yeah.
And if your focus is only on 2 or 3 national stations, you can miss out what's happening in other areas. And while there has been an awful lot of those small little points to counterbalance the national points, they're still happening. And that's, I think, the strength of their campaign was there was a lot of local surrogates out for Catherine Connolly right around the country. In a way, certainly, well, we can't really test it because the Jim Cavan campaign ended so early and so abruptly.
Yeah.
But with Heather Humphreys, I don't see the same thing. We'll come to that later.
Yeah, we will, of course. Yeah. I mean, one of the peak controversies early doors with Connolly's campaign was her comments around Hamas.
Yeah.
That was probably one of the most damaging as the campaign on, not the most damaging as it would come out. But just as a refresher on
Good morning. Independent presidential candidate Catherine Connolly says she stands by comments she made in relation to the role of Hamas in the future government of Gaza. She's faced criticism over her views on Hamas. She insists it's a terrorist organization, but said Israel has acted like a terrorist state. Catherine Connolly told News Talk she has never been equivocal in her condemnation of the.
So I mean, those I think the linkages then, or the line of attack there afterwards was that Catherine was linking Hamas to the Palestinian people as a whole and so on. What I found quite interesting then on the flip side is regardless of how much negative sentiment was attributable to those original comments, a week later her focus was on the genocide, and that sentiment flipped entirely.
That's the ability. And again, that you're right, and there are a couple of points for Catherine Connolly. It's not that everything was perfect. It's not that tax lines didn't work. It's they didn't have a lasting impact. It didn't go beyond a couple of days, and it didn't pull the graph down significantly. But that was one of the ones where it's one of the rare occasions you see with her, which she does dip below.
Yeah,
it does dip into the negative area, but it's not for a long period. And
I suppose in and around the same time, and there was headwinds against the Connolly campaign, and quite significant ones, but that they never really clicked. I mean, here's another comment.
The independent presidential candidate Catherine Connolly has described America as an imperial power and defended comments she made yesterday in which she drew parallels between the increase of military spending in Germany today and rearmament in the 1930s.
And just to add to that, the German comments.
Here, Connolly likens Germany's arms spend to the 1930s. And here we're told Catherine Connolly has compared Germany's increase in military spending in the face of Russia's invasion of Ukraine to Nazi rearmament policy.
Very heavy.
It's very heavy. First of all, it's a recognition from her, or not even recognition is the wrong word, which is it's an acceptance that she was appealing to a base and to a much smaller base, but to excite that base. And so it was getting out. It was red meat to core supporters, but it wasn't going to switch to anyone. It wasn't going to move people away. Certainly wasn't going to move people away from Heather Humphreys, and it was unlikely to move people away who are even thinking about Jim Gavin at that point. So, but having said that, it is in any other campaign that would have been a far more impactful moment. But what you have is you've now at one you've got 3 candidates, and at some point you've got 2. It's now a choice between 2. So I mightn't be wild about what you're saying, but I'm going to end up going with you if I'm even less enthused about what the other person is saying, because there's still a relative dimension to this. And that's, I think, the other thing to take away. When these negative impacts, they're having some impact. So these negative attacks are having some impact, but it's not sufficient to move people from column A into column B.
And you know, like a week later, then we come into the hiring controversy.
Catherine Connolly, of course, is a presidential candidate. She's defending hiring a convicted criminal to work for her. It's emerged the presidential candidate previously hired a woman who was jailed for gun and ammunition possession. But
you know, and that story, you know, did track for a long time. It did become probably one of the largest kind of negative sentiment stories for Catherine over that period.
It's I think would kind of follow what is and the representation, blank representation.
And it was actually quite curious. I did notice that Connolly's campaign cited Emma Queeve as the person who referred, that person to her. That story actually broke on Galway Bay FM 2 weeks before Connolly's campaign denied it, or confirmed it, should I say. So it's quite interesting that these nuggets were emerging on local radio before they even hit.
And again, that just do not underestimate somebody who's involved in any campaign. Do not underestimate the power and the influence and the impact of local radio.
So there was additional mentions of Syria and who she was photographed with, but you know, I suppose we're all now familiar with this story.
That's what I do. Fine Gael has called on Catherine Connolly to confirm or deny whether she put families out of their homes during her work as a barrister. Ms Connolly has confirmed she did represent banks during her legal career. The Bar Council of Ireland said barristers operate a cab rank rule and have to accept instructions in all areas of law. Fine Gael TD Barry Ward and Social Democrats TD Sinead Gibney.
You know, so I mean, that was the strongest negative story that you know, Connie had to defend herself against. It first rears its head, you know, the 10th of October, but you can clearly see then a week later, 2 weeks later, you know, a very concerted effort to push that narrative, which I think, you know, probably backfired in the end. Do you know?
It did backfire, and it backfired for a couple of reasons. Number one, because there's only 2 candidates in the race, so kind of, well, there was, you would, if I'm attacking you, I might pull your support down, but am I getting that support over to me? That's where it wasn't heading. Where it is quite clear, and I made a reference to this during the radio coverage over the weekend, which is negative campaigning it's a dark art. Usually it works. People campaigns involve themselves in negative campaigning because it has an impact, but it has its best impact when it's confirming to voters something that a suspicion that might be in their mind, and you're basically saying, yeah, you're right to think that, and to exacerbate it. So therefore, I'm sure Fine Gael, in terms of its own polling, in terms of its own sentiment analysis, in terms of what it was doing, was seeing that this was having some impact. The problem for Fine Gael was it maybe was pulling Catherine Connolly down, but it was not enough to close the gap with Heather Humphreys, and B, it wasn't switching people away from Catherine Connolly to Heather Humphreys.
Yeah.
And that's it. So I understand fully why Fine Gael did it. Completely understand why they did it. I completely understand why they went hell for leather for it, because at that stage they had very few little toes left in the box.
Yeah.
And there's a certain degree that they were throwing everything at the wall.
Yeah.
This one was working. This one was having a little bit of an impact. But I won't say too little, too late. But I think at that point, the fact there was only 2 candidates. They were hoping it was a zero-sum game. If she comes down, we go up. It wasn't.
No. And you know, you can see with the Humphreys campaign. We'll take a look now at you know, her controversies. You know, pre-Gavin withdrawal, she was doing well in getting her message out there, but it stalls post withdrawal, you know, and just the like doesn't recover that momentum.
I think it's very, very difficult to look at Catherine Connolly's without looking at Jim Gavin. Not quite at the same time.
Yeah.
But the degree of, and I know it's the headline in terms of when you look at this right throughout the campaign, it is the extent to which Jim Gavin was the talking point for such a long period of the campaign, long after he was out of the race, that hurt Heather Humphreys.
Yeah.
Because Catherine Connolly's campaign was trundling away. And while there was certainly no formal arrangement, there was no formal, but Heather Humphreys and Jim Gavin were roughly two government candidates who were going to be dependent on each other for support to get through. And while there was a kind of assumption that, well, if Jim Gavin pulls out, well, his supporters will automatically go to Heather Humphreys. No, it doesn't work that way.
True.
But not only that is, in terms of the coverage, Heather Humphreys was now having to climb over the Jim Gavin, Micheál Martin negative coverage to try and get any positive coverage.
Yeah, very
and
true.
that's an impossible task.
Yeah.
Particularly if you're not the most gifted communicator.
Yeah, and look, just in terms of Humphreys' controversies, early October.
That fight, I had a real fight on my hands on that particularly. It is fair to say that the opposition to it was very vociferous, and the cabinet was almost evenly divided on it.
And this is Shane Ross in relation to the drink driving legislation that, I suppose is saying that, didn't, Humphreys didn't take a more
he'd run that story out a little bit earlier, about a week earlier in the Sunday Independent. And it took a while for that to come through. And Shane Ross was banging that drum fairly hard.
And I mean the ramifications for that then, later on was just in relation to the Shane O'Farrell case. I think I have it. It actually emerged, I think, earlier as a story. So some of these were not particularly heavy. I mean,
in and of themselves, the volume of coverage.
All races hoping to avoid being early fence fallers in this contest. But Fine Gael's Heather Humphreys, she awoke to awkward headlines in the Irish Times and criticism from Lucia O'Farrell, the mother of Monaghan hit and run victim Shane O'Farrell.
That as a story just ran. For several weeks, and did do like a good degree of damage, if we can just find it here. But and
I think the problem for Heather Humphreys at this point was she'd not had a very good first debate. She'd not done badly, but the Virgin Media debate, but she'd been seen to kind of hug the rails and not get noticed, while the others were having a go at it. And I think, therefore, she didn't have sufficient bank of sentiment out there. There were a little bit of doubts creeping in. So she didn't have enough goodwill behind her. And again, which is contrasted with and again, this is all about relative, which is you're making a choice between candidates. So compared to Catherine Connolly, who had much clearer definition about her, and had surrogates, had a greater broad section of surrogates saying nice things about her. Heather Humphreys had ministers out speaking on her behalf. Now, ministers are fine people. They're not the most popular people in the world at the moment, as you look for any opinion poll. So the people she had talking her up were people that others were not everyone, except their own biggest supporters, were prepared to listen to. And the second thing for Heather, she had what I couldn't understand was she had a really strong personal story to tell, and I didn't hear it told in the same way Catherine Connolly. Now, Heather was now trying to do it in a far more compressed time period because Catherine was able to do it over a much longer lead-in. So that was a difficulty, and I do accept that it was not an easy hill to climb for her. But when these things about Jennifer, which are very personal, really personal, and I don't mean personal against Heather, that's things that just strike people, kind of, that poor woman, how could anyone not have listened to that mother and felt? And Heather didn't really have a good answer to that, and didn't have a sufficient depth of warmth amongst the wider public.
And funny you should say that. This is a clip from the 22nd of October, then, just in relation to the same incident.
Heather Humphreys apologised to the family of hit and run victim Shane O'Farrell for not doing more for them. She used the word sorry 10 times in a 4-minute span.
As I said, I'm sorry that I wasn't able to deliver for them.
And I just, like 3 days before polling, that story, which had resonated quite, strongly with the public. And I might add, like, that this was on Clare FM. I don't think it achieved the same national prominence as a story. But it's just something that they couldn't get.
They never got ahead of it. They didn't seem to anticipate it. But that's the whole point, which is by the time they got the right message on it, you're now too far down the track. You're now too far away from the original story. So it had now got a longer tail. So if you look back at the graph and the rest of where this was mentioned, it's a longer lifespan.
Yeah.
Whereas whether you like Catherine Connolly's answers or not, she tended to deal with the negative stuff quite quickly. And it mightn't kill off the story completely, but it compressed it. It didn't drag it out.
Yeah. I mean, look, the other controversies there, obviously Paul Murphy, issuing legal proceedings. One of the big things, nobody likes a loser, and the polling stories just continuously added that narrative.
New polling from the Irish Times and Ipsos gives Catherine Connolly a commanding 18-point lead over her rival Heather Humphreys. Catherine Connolly told reporters momentum is behind her campaign and has been building.
The momentum has been there from day one. I think people have engaged from day one. I think there was a disconnect between the official commentary as such and what was happening.
So I mean, again, these were repeated negative stories on the polling side that just kind of continue to add that negative sentiment.
And this presidential election has been unusual from previous ones. Where previous ones, people who were ahead in the first week or so were back markers by the third or fourth week.
Yeah.
This is the first time where you've really had somebody ahead and keeping ahead. No, not dramatically ahead, but keeping ahead throughout the whole thing. Now, again, some of that comes back to what happened around Jim Gavin and the implosion of that campaign and the impact for Heather Humphreys. But Heather Humphreys was never ahead.
No.
And you have to go back to Mairead McGuinness with this long pre-campaign. And that's an unfair comparison. So from that point of view, but you're right, which is polling then does feed into it. And I think it's going to be interesting to look at. You've got Kevin Cunningham's quasi exit poll in terms of what were the deciding factors, and for Catherine Connolly, and you see it again replicated in this, which is a lot of places with Catherine Connolly, people were voting positively for our candidate.
Yes.
And if you can have that the whole way through, that you've got a really strong campaign.
We have about 15 minutes left. I might invite people just to ask any questions in the chat. We'll get to them beforehand. And I suppose let's get on to the Jim Gavin withdrawal, which was the defining moment of the election. So I mean, this is where it started late at night.
In breaking news, Jim Gavin has announced he's pulling out of the presidential election race. In a statement,
very dramatic, obviously, filtered through, quite just chewed up the news cycle, obviously.
What you can say is that what it looks like Fianna Fáil has decided to do is what there's a classic we used to call kind of Sunday night for pundit. So if you release a story Sunday night, you're going to get you're going to get the front pages for the Monday, and that appeared to be Fianna Fáil's strategy. But then that was followed on by Micheál Martin doing television and radio. And the story just got more negative. That was the extraordinary part, which is that there wasn't kind of an exit, and that was the trap. No, it keeps getting negative.
And you can see that just, I might just play a few clips here back to back just so you get a sense of it.
So in that case, then it was obvious, as far as Jack Chambers is concerned, that there was indeed some documentary evidence that letters had been sent, that it was basically untenable for Jim Gavin to claim that he had no idea this dispute was being made.
Who said what, when?
And the tenant who Jim Gavin owed the €3,300 to is Neil Donald, a journalist.
It's just a comedy of errors and just constant
but
new
what's
revelations.
interesting is that you see this on the track from kind of Sunday through Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. But in terms of how it's playing out behind the scenes, it's kind of happening since Friday. And this story had rolled down before then and was having a very negative impact. I mean, it is I think the story of this election will be around that. It will also be around, why would you pull a candidate completely from the race? Why would you actually, having arrested all the time the rest was, now particularly the ballot papers are printed, everything's done. What would make you decide we're going to take this candidate out of the race? Or now it is quite possible, and I know Jim Gavin did decide himself to come out of the race and told him that. But then why would you say, listen, John, do you understand what's going to happen here? So I just think that dynamic is some of those things that people are going to delve into. So the TikTok of from Friday, Saturday, Sunday into Monday. But then when the Taoiseach goes out on Monday to set out what happened, and fairness to him, he went and he did the 6-1 news. But this is then in the 2 days before a budget. And a budget which people in hindsight weren't wild about.
No.
So the cumulative negatives of that week, you would have thought in hindsight, you would have been better leaving Jim Gavin in the race.
Yeah. And again, just as a story, that period, that week, sucked up 50.1% of all mentions in relation to the presidential campaign.
It is just absolutely incredible.
And just in terms of cumulative negative sentiment, to give you an idea of context, the entire Connolly campaign netted plus 6,000. In terms of that kind of cumulative messaging, and battling, obviously, kind of negative sentiment as part of that. This was, in the space of 72 hours or more. Just a complete implosion that I don't think is.
Yeah, and it's an implosion that goes beyond the candidate. It goes beyond that campaign. We're kind of still it's a bit like the Big Bang. We can still feel senses of it now, this week, next week, and the week after. This is not leaving the atmosphere anytime soon.
And again, look, the follow-on topics that you mentioned in terms of selection process.
Kerry Fianna Fáil TD wants an independent review into how Jim Gavin was selected by his party for the presidential.
Still, obviously, in process on that at the moment.
The withdrawal of Jim Gavin is a ginormous blow. It's a huge blow for Fianna Fáil. It may be the beginning of a slow exit for Micheál Martin.
And again, I think when you look at the overall trending sentiment here, the Fianna Fáil leadership question, the question around Micheál Martin, ends up being, we produced the report, the RAP report, looking at every story of the election. Bar Jim's immediate withdrawal from the race, the next story is, Micheál Martin and Fianna Fáil leadership.
And that's an extraordinary thing from a presidential election. Several months back, I said I thought this was a consequential presidential election. This wasn't what I had in mind. This wasn't what I was predicting. Nobody could predict this. But I had felt that the presidential election, and purely on the basis of that kind of January, February, March, you would expect us to have something in the ether about, well, this is the person who's thinking of running. And you heard, obviously, Bertie Ahern's name had been mentioned. Fergus Finley's name had been mentioned, and a few other names have been mentioned. So you expect those names to be out there. But there wasn't a real traction on this. And not because the public weren't engaged, because it seemed political parties were engaged. So I was worried that we were going to have a presidential election where the parties disengaged. To a small degree, has happened. But what happened in Fianna Fáil's case is that something that they could never have predicted, which was didn't really think it through, didn't really sit down and work it out. But then when this went wrong, pulling out the candidate, that just really had a massive impact. And I no doubt in my mind this was nobody designed this, nobody wanted this. But that's the way it worked out.
The other thing that you start to see is it becomes a trigger for voter anger.
I started watching I kept an eye on the campaign, and then the Jim Gavin thing kicked off, and I thought it was fairly a poor state of affairs if that's the best few candidates that they can put in front of us. So I haven't really been tuned into any of it since.
It's been a bit of a farce with Jim Gavin having.
And that was echoed across all local call-in shows and tech shows.
It is, and it's kind of, you see it kind of replicate. Well, obviously you see a direct manifestation of it in the large number of spoiled ballots, and the thing that builds up around that. I know you've done some stuff around possible other candidates and people getting into race and that race, etc. I'm mindful of the fact that you're running at it, but that we're kind of running down the clock here. But I think that's the other telling thing of this race, which is that there was a real anger, and people felt the choice wasn't wide enough, and it wasn't that they disliked Heather Humphreys, or it wasn't that they disliked her. They just felt the choice wasn't wide enough. We don't have a big enough field here. Now, there's many complicated reasons in that, and it couldn't measure that. But I think for people who are involved in campaigns, they need to go back and look through these ones. To see, there's a great line about how are mistakes made? Well, one step at a time. I mean, that's exactly what you see there.
For sure. And I suppose one of the beneficiaries of that anger was Maria Steen. And we were tracking Maria in the background of the campaign. Naturally her volume of mentions falls off following the the conclusion of the nominations.
nomination process, yeah.
But you're still talking, like still very much kind of spoken about 71 mentions on average a week.
Yeah.
And
right into the intriguing thing about that is right into the campaign. It wasn't that when the nominations process closed, that any talk was stopped. It continued on.
And like generally net positive. Like obviously kind of there's wider discussion around her views and so on. But what you tend to find is because she wasn't in the race, she wasn't articulating anything. The electorate were picking up the phone to say we just wanted her on the ticket to have a discussion around particular issues. That it became she developed a national platform as a non-polarizing candidate because she didn't have to express any views to get a mention.
Oh no, it's win-win, which is you get to be talked about and nobody gets to judge you. I mean, it's a winning formula. It doesn't get you elected, but it's a winning formula.
No.
But actually, the intriguing thing about this is people kind of said, "Oh, it's great to have the starter. Why didn't you have the starter before and the rest of it?" Once upon you did have it, which is what you had political parties listening to their councillors and TDs who knew what was going on in their community.
Yeah.
Now you have it where you can measure. Not that you can do away with councillors and TDs. Any councillor listening, don't panic. But for political parties, for political groupings, for independents, for everyone to have this kind of thing that you can see in real time. And it just gives you a sense. It's not going to decide what you're going to do, but it's like focus groups. Political parties do focus groups not to decide what's the policy that's going to resonate, what's the policy that's going to work, but rather how are people perceiving that message I sent out? Because the art of communications isn't framing a sentence. It's what did the person understand from what you said? Did they get the core of your message? And this is a great way of really excellent tool of measuring how effective messages are and where they need to be corrected, where they need to be moved, and where maybe people are not hearing the thing you think you're saying.
Yeah, for sure. And also just getting a sense as to what might be happening, at a very local level in terms of narrative, dialogue, trends and topics, so you can address that. There's one clip there that I didn't play where Catherine Connolly takes a phone call from Radio Kerry in her car en route, and that people I think just appreciate that. They appreciate the engagement. So just if there's anyone who has any questions at this stage, I think we have 3 minutes left. Do you plan on running another session like this using a similar format with the database to capture the backgrounds? So I mean, look, we've had quite a really positive response to this. We've had over 10,000 views to the website. This is obviously our first rollout of this technology. We're only in the market, I'd say 6 weeks, and we kind of looked at this as a format to really kind of demonstrate what the tool is capable of. I mean, we can do this for party leaders. We can do this for political parties. We can do it for particular trends, housing. Where you can kind of look at the whole lot. And we don't just do it for radio. We can do it for digital and
but I think that's an important point, which is this was specifically based
just
on
broadcast.
Broadcast rate and the rest of it, but it is the ability to do this right across all.
So let's see a question. I don't think we have any other questions there. Any final thoughts before we finish up?
No, I think everyone two things, which is people in politics should be absolutely grateful that there's not an election due for a while. Well, there's a by-election, of course, coming up in Galway.
But that's true.
Maybe this is the way this could serve a purpose in Galway West. It could start out with the left unity, which one is ahead and which is behind. But in terms of the politics doesn't change, but the techniques and the technology changes, but the engagement is the same. People think about politics the same way they always did. It's where they get their information from. It's across platforming. And I think for anyone who can judge like what's getting pushed through, I never underestimate the intelligence of the Irish voter. They are really discerning in what they pick up on. And while polling is a slightly crude measurement of it, it's a fast improvement. And I think a lot of people just get fed up listening to politicians saying, well, I don't believe opinion polls. Of course they believe opinion polls. Of course they watch. The most assiduous readers of opinion polls are politicians. But to have something like this as well that you can look at over a sustained period and to measure, as you say again, even within policy areas or push through, to see where voters are. and how they're perceiving things more than anything else.
Yeah.
This is not a predictor of people's voting intentions.
No.
It is telling you how effective your message has become and how much it will get through and where you need to correct it because people are getting the wrong impression of what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, look, we've got 30 seconds left, so only to say thank you very much for Derek for joining us here and giving us, sharing his wealth of knowledge in terms of the political system. And for anyone who would like to take a closer look at the Everhaze platform, go to everhaze.com and book a demo, and we'll see you there. Thanks very much. Look, appreciate it.
Cheers. Take care.
Take care, guys.